So, this is a part 2 of my previous video about the Ballas in GTA San Andreas, more specifically why I feel the Ballas show themselves to be a better organization. I know what you're thinking, this is a pretty stupid and oddly specific video concept. And yeah, it is. But I've always loved the GTA series, and I've always paid attention to the world of the GTA games, and as I said in the last video, I've always felt that, although not fan favorite, the Ballas seem to be a better organization than the families in both games, leading us to this oddly specific analysis video for your entertainment. Sorry for the wait, by the way, for anyone who was actually waiting. I know this took forever, but this is like the third or fourth time I'm trying to do this video. Just like the last video, I'll be looking at each gang and comparing each other and present why I, of course, feel the Ballas are better. And I'll be looking at many aspects, including the story, gameplay, and lore. Speaking of lore, I want to assure you that everything I bring up will be in the HD universe's canon. I have played and researched everything in this to assure that everything I say is lore-wise and gameplay-wise correct. This means I obviously won't be including any fan, headcanon, crew versus crew, or RP lore. Now, a little bit of context is needed here for those who don't know. The 3D and HD eras and events that happen in these games are in completely different universes. They do have loose connections, being some events and characters carrying over from universes and being canon or connected. It's not a topic touched on much, so a lot's up to speculation. One last thing, this video is only going to be the analysis of the two gangs, where the last vid was the synopsis of the story and analysis. I just had to cut it down because it would have been way too long. But now we can finally start to focus on the events of HD Los Santos gang life. Starting with a brief summary of the two gangs, there are three sets in the families: the Chamberlain Gangster families, Davis Neighborhood families, and the Carson Avenue families. The families are prone to infighting among sets, with it being shown that some sets are not on good terms with at least one other family set. The families do sell drugs, including crack cocaine, and occupy the west side of South Central Los Santos in the city of Davis. The Ballas also have three sets: Original Covenant Ballas, East Side Ballas, and South Rancho Ballas. The Ballas, of course, dealing in narcotics as well and occupying the east side, with Original Covenant occupying Grove Street itself. The Grove Street families are canon in the HD universe, but it's not known to what extent the events of GTA San Andreas are connected to GTA 5. It's also not known what happened at GSF or how the Ballas obtained Grove Street, but it's theorized by protagonist Franklin Clinton that they moved on to being CEOs and gave up the gang life. But we also hear from Balla members suggesting that they took the cul-de-sac from GSF. Either way, it seems that Sweet's for the hood mentality didn't last too long. An Original Covenant Balla can be heard saying that families got kicked out of Grove a long time ago, and an East Side Balla did make a post saying on social media, "Thanks for giving us Grove Street," but that's all that's known about GSF and their downfall. Starting this analysis off, we have weaponry. Now, for this point, on the family side, I gotta be honest, it's one of those gray areas canon-wise. I don't want to sit here and tell you that the families only have low-level weapons, because I'd be lying. The truth is, we don't know much because they don't appear too often for me to make a fair judgment. So let's start with the bit that we do know on the families. The best that they show for weaponry is in the gang attacks, with the ability to have high-powered weaponry. But I want to leave this up to y'all whether this counts or not, because all gang attack peds have the same arsenal, so it's ambiguous on how that fits in the lore. Overall, I think it probably is canon, but the fact that all gang attacks are basically copy and paste makes it a little muddy. But on more concrete grounds, we get to see how they operate on the Davis South Central League, where they're interrupting an Azteca's Lost MC drug deal. Now, this is a straightforward deal. It's multiple gang members doing drug deals, a lot of them in fact, with heavy weaponry. However, the families only have pistols and SMGs, and it's not like they show strength in numbers. There's 4 of them, and the OG Vernon. So this one is definitely not in their favor. They do have better weapons in the leak after that, but don't worry, we'll get to that later. Now, if you look at the setups the Ballas do for drug deals in comparison, it's crazy how low level this is. Moving on to the Ballas, they have high-powered weaponry, just like every other enemy faction in GTA Online, but they do stand out in a few ways. The first is their usages of explosives as seen in the mission Long Stretch, where the Ballas use breaching charges, with this being the only time I can think of that remote bombs or breaching charges are being used outside of the player.
Ballas got bombs now?
The second way they stand out is in their usages of sniper rifles, once in the mission Lamar Down and once in the mission End Product. Thirdly, their possession of a mounted 50 caliber machine gun on a Karen Rebel in the Series A heist setup Weed. And lastly, their usages of RPGs in the mission Lamar Down and the Ballas Rampage. For a second, I want to take into account a little bit of the HD Universe's lore, specifically of the Jingoism Act, which was renewed by Congress in 2008 and would allow the government to spy on anyone for no reason, outlaw flag burning, require American citizens to speak well of their country, and also have thousands of National Office of Security Enforcement agents to be sworn in. Taking this into account, into the game's world, it could say a lot. While yes, it is a parody of the real-life Patriot Act, it still has effects in the in-game world and is mentioned multiple times. Either way, this could show how the Ballas have serious connections or serious cash flow, most likely both. And it's not like it's common for AI factions to use RPGs. We mainly see high-ranking organized crime syndicates use them, and even so, most of them only use it once. The Ballas are shown to use it once in Lamar Down and a total of 3 times in the Rampage mission. Now we get to move on to tactics. Once again, there's not too much to analyze on the family side of things, considering they don't make much mission appearances besides their pitiful setup for the Aztec is in Lost. But don't worry, their time will come. But for now, let's analyze the tactics of the Ballas. They show themselves to be good at forming setups for whomever their enemy is, as demonstrated in multiple missions. They also show to utilize good vantage points and use rifles and snipers, as well as attacking from multiple angles. They've also shown to utilize roadblocks, such as in the Weed setup for the Series A heist. Similar to the Ballas in the 3D universe, they seem to be great at organizing attacks. I would argue even more so in GTA 5 than in San Andreas. I also want to point out how they show improvements in their protection of their weed farm, in their weed packaging and production operation in the sawmill in Paleto Bay. Chronologically in the game's timeline, it's first seen in an old, simple versus mission, Weed Killer, where it's simply to steal a shipment from the Ballas from a few guards, and next on the timeline, we see the Series A setup, with more guards and a Rebel 50 cal. And lastly, we see it in Lamar Down, where they've upgraded to snipers and RPGs. I know this is reaching a little bit, but the pieces are there and they do show improvement. It's also noticeable for them to have multiple reinforcements in the county, as seen in the setup and in Lamar Down. This could be a testament to their overall size. Moving on to the next point, organization, and finally, the families get their time in the spotlight. But it's not looking too good for them. There's less for the Ballas here, so I'll just get them out of the way. As previously mentioned, the Ballas have unity amongst sets with no inner beef between them, and they even show to work together in certain cases. They also show to have several different businesses, including the selling and manufacture of drugs, the potential chop shop operation, as seen in the security contract, where they bring a car they stole from the LS Car Meet to a garage they own in Davis, and they also show to maybe have their hands in hijacking, with the mission involving the stolen shipment of TVs and the hijacking of the players' vintage arcade cabinets. Now let's start with the families, starting with Gerald, a family's drug dealer, most likely CGF. Most of G's missions in GTA Online involve stealing drugs from rival gangs, especially in the beginning where the player is new to the city and Gerald takes advantage of this. Which is fine, good for him, pretty smart even. But this does get reckless to a point. This is perfectly shown in the mission No Hey Bronca, where Gerald sends Stanley to a deal with the Vagos, even though most of the product that Gerald has procured has been stolen from the Vagos by him. And, I wonder how that goes for Stanley.
Hey, put those guys in
And he continues to rip other gangs off after this, even though he lost the player's no-name reputation. His recklessness continues in his last play missions as well. Besides, if the Ballas can make their own drugs, why can't Gerald? Also, this can seriously burn bridges and leave you with almost no allies or even business partners. Seriously, if Gerald fucked with the Lost Vagos, Ballas, Korean mob, Chinese mob, professionals, and the rednecks doing a deal with Trevor Phillips, and the rednecks doing a deal with the Ballas, and the Marabunta Grande, that leaves very few potential allies. Maybe the Armenian mob or Madrazo cartel? Maybe the Italian mob? We know that La Cosa Nostra do sell drugs in the GTA HD universe, but their presence in Los Santos is scarce outside of Rocco Pelosi and Enzo Benelli, and they aren't necessarily around for that long. The El Rubio cartel and Duggan family don't make appearances in Los Santos until later in the game, and El Rubio's cartel doesn't seem to have barely any presence, and we don't even know if the Duggan family sells drugs. Gerald is just making enemies with little to gain from it. It's not like he's stealing much here, but he's making enemies. And don't get me wrong, the Ballas have beefs too, but even from what we know from that, that's a little different. For example, look at their beef with the Madrazo cartel. We know that the Carson Avenue families are at least not on good terms with the Madrazo cartel, but that's just a suggestion made in reference by Martin in talking about the gang attacks. AKA Martin just saying, hey, if you got time, go shut down their operation once or twice for me. That's really nothing too serious. But if we look at the missions revolving around the Ballas given by Martin, we can see more of a in-depth beef. The first one being the mission that I mentioned previously about the stolen TVs, where Martin mentions a lack of respect by the Ballas, and Martin insists on the player to not ask questions about the situation. So there is obviously something in the background between the two organizations. The Ballas even fired back at the cartel with their killings of the henchmen and attempted assassination of Madrazo's chief lieutenant. They go head to head with one of the biggest criminal organizations in the city, and there still is one more mission after that, where Martin sends a player to assassinate a Balla among other targets. But the Ballas do this and maintain balance with other organizations in the city. Even with their previous connections with the IAA for drugs and setting up Agent ULP for the Russians in the ULP Intel Prep mission, this at least shows how well connected they are. They didn't just run off on the plug, they ran off on the US government, with light repercussions, most likely due to them taking advantage of the IAA's corruption. Those are high up the food chain beefs. And this is great balancing with their high up the food chain affiliations, like the professionals, their statewide connections with the rednecks, and their slight connection with the Russians. If you compare this to Gerald's recklessness, I don't know. Next, I want to bring up the Forum Gangster Families subset of CGF. This subset that was put in motion by Lamar and Franklin. Now, Lamar isn't shown to have much of a standing in Chamberlain Gangster Families. Matter of fact, I'd say it's much worse, but we'll get into that. Franklin has been showing himself to try to distance away from the gang violence, as well as both showing a disdain for the family OGs, this being both Lamar and Franklin. Now, Lamar has, in the span of a year, started beef with the Ballas twice, once in the Lowriders DLC and once in the story, and starts beef with the Vagos once in the DLC, as well as just narrowly avoiding responsibility for the incident on the mission repossession. Let's not forget when he just up and decides to take over, which inevitably fails, starts beef with the gangs, gets Gerald arrested, and is almost killed by not only the ops, but family OGs themselves. There's the fact that only one of his contact missions can be considered sanctioned by the families, and he starts shit again with his actions in story mode, leading to the situation with Stretch. Stretch is worth mentioning too for a sec. A family OG growing apart from their gang, seeing to themselves how the Ballas are a better fit. Must be a common theme. But Lamar is allowed to do all of this and get away with it. I can see maybe him not being killed, but he's still in the gang? It doesn't end there neither. Franklin, the one who has stopped going to the set meetings and has separated himself completely from the hood entirely, and LD, lanky dumbass, have enough say to start their own set. Now, we don't know what role they do play in the foundation of FDF, but We do know that they were talking about it in story mode, and in online, it's confirmed to exist. So my question is, who the fuck are the OGs of this bitch-ass gang? Oh look, it's Davis Neighborhood Family OG Vernon. Now I do find it a little odd that Vernon was so involved with Lamar's actions as a member of CGF and the Lowriders DLC, but whatever. If the two sets have a close relationship, I can see it. But that's not what I want to talk about Vernon for. In the Contract DLC's South Central leak, after a favor is done for Vernon to look into the leak for Dr. Dre's music, he said he asked around, and the Ballas and P's name kept coming up. Source? Okay, whatever. He's got a lead, and I got a question. Why could Vernon not just hit P or his homies up on Snap-O-Matic, Life Invader, or Bleeder? Why was sending a group of families heavily armed into Ballas turf in green lowriders and green clothing without Vernon being there just so they would have to sit and wait so it could inevitably backfire be his first instinct? Vernon literally says that they'd probably have to kill a bunch of P's dudes just to talk to him. Why the fuck is that, Vernon? You antisocial? You not a people person? You can't communicate? The Ballas can communicate just fine. Lamar tried to start a war between the Ballas and the Vagos, and they have a meeting to talk about it. I think the Ballas would be more than willing to talk. That is, if Vernon handled this thing better, aka if he handled this in any other way. And of course the Ballas know that it's the Vagos with Dr. Dre's phone. He makes it clear that the Vago playing the music is doing it for clout, and is very obvious about it. I get that Vernon and the Davis Neighborhood families probably wouldn't know this, considering they don't have Hood in Rancho. But do you know who does? South Rancho Ballas. And you know who has a close alliance and business relationship with SRB? OCB, the set P is an OG of. That's probably how P knows in the first place. You know, if Vernon would have thought this out without being a reckless bozo, then maybe those innocent Ballas wouldn't have to die. Not just those innocent Ballas, but those innocent families wouldn't have had to die. But that's DNF and CGF covered. What about Carson Avenue families? They've barely been brought up. That's because they only appear in little things, but don't worry, they're not perfect neither. They're seen in a hacking device setup for the Diamond Casino heist. They're seen dead on their own hood after a drug deal gone wrong. And there are two other variants of this deal, but those investigations are on what could be considered either neutral territory or enemy hood. Nah, CAF just gets taken out on their own block like it's nothing. Crazy. And don't worry, we'll get into territory. But that's not all, because they also get their product jacked, and when you retrieve their stolen product, their boss, the same CAF boss that will, put a bounty on your head, will text you asking for their product back. Which is more funny than a statement of them. And before we get off this point, I just want to point out how in the mission and product, Gerald takes a complete L, and it's funny as fuck. Like, the Ballas steal his product, use his own trackers as bait, and Gerald has to destroy his whole supply before the cops can get to him. And the Ballas got their money. Common Ballas W. Now, moving on to my next point, I want to bring up territory. Both the territory and whereabouts of the gangs, and how they defend it. The families seem to have the overall west side of South Central LS, and the Ballas seem to occupy the east side of South Central, with most of the more eastern parts belonging to the Vagos and Aztecas. But, thanks to the information given by Lamar on the mission Ballas to the Wall, we know that Jamestown Street in Rancho is not only Vagos turf, but also Ballas turf. Although not seen in free roam, this is most likely where SRB resides, as the Ballas are seen in Jamestown Street and even at the Rancho projects in that mission. So, almost all of the east side is somewhat Ballas territory, at least partially. Now that we got the gang's territory sorted, I want to bring to your attention the ULP Intel Prep mission for the Doomsday Heist. I'm talking specifically about the apartment belonging to the Ballas that set up ULP. Now, there's no definitive spawn point for the apartment, so instead we can take the apartments I mentioned as suggestions that the Ballas could have lived in that apartment, because the fact that those are potential spawn points mean that that is not out of the realms of possibility for the Ballas to have lived there. So the potential apartment spawns are 2 in Chamberlain Hills, 1 in Strawberry, 1 in Rancho, 1 in La Puerta, 1 in Vespucci, 2 in West Vinewood, 1 in Hawick, and 1 in El Burro Heights. Now, the ones in La Puerta and Vespucci and El Burro Heights are considered enemy gang turf, but right now I just want to bring your attention to the 2 in Chamberlain Hills and the 1 in Strawberry, as these are apartments directly in Family's Hood. I just wanted to put that out there, keep that in your mind for later. Now let's talk defense of said territory. The Ballas seem to have mostly a heavy presence on their hood when attacked, and they respond in force as well as in numbers. The only real instance seen of an enemy gang members on their turf are the families that were going to help Vernon find P. Those were armed families strolling in Ballas' hood with green lowriders, and of course the Ballas engaged them, as well as heavily outnumbering them, with reinforcements on the way to assist. Now, on the family's end, let's see how many instances we have of Ballas on family's hood. It's not just once or twice. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 appearances and missions where Ballas are deep on family's hood, heavily armed as if it was their own hood. And remember the 3 potential spawn points in Chamberlain Hills for the ULP prep? In the Lowrider DLC, we see a Balla walking out of the projects, and besides the ones that arrive in cars, all of the Ballas in the Trevor Rampage are merged from the projects. So I honestly don't think it's too out of the realm of possibility that multiple Ballas live on Family's Hood too. Well, I guess it's not a theory, considering we see them coming out of their block. So this does show at least some Balla presence on the west side, especially since they go untouched by families on all appearances. This is in high contrast from the Ballas' reaction to the families on their turf. It's not even just the Ballas hanging out in families' block that go unpunished. The Vagos parade into Chamberlain Hills in yellow lowriders, attacking and robbing Lamar's dispensary, and the only resistance they get is Lamar and Franklin themselves. The gang didn't care about an enemy gang attacking a dispensary owned by an ex-family in their own hood. Like, wow, they can tag up their own hood, but they sure as shit can't protect it.
Well, what you gonna do if the Ballas roll through? Throw shoes at them?
So from this, we see that not only can the families not protect their hood for shit, but the Ballas potentially even have a presence there, maybe even running a few projects on Family's Hood. This as well speaks to their size, considering they have multiple members all around South Central LS, and they also share hood with Vagos and Aztecas in Rancho. Not to mention, if we call back to the Trevor Rampage, we see that the Ballas, they do all of that. They send all of those Ballas to try to kill Trevor because Trevor attacked one Balla and threatened the other. So the takeaway from that is the Ballas unironically protect Chamberlain Hills, a family's hood, better than the families do. I mean, that just speaks for itself, right? And for my final point, I want to bring up really quickly the values of our two gangs, because that's something that the Ballas show that the families, or at very least CGF, don't. Now, I've already mentioned the family's tendency to have beef between sets and the Ballas' tendency to work together, but what I'm talking about here is the values that these gangs hold. Now, we know that Lamar does not have a good relationship with family OGs, but that's obvious why that is. But we also know that Franklin turned away from the gang life as a whole, as well as having disdain for the family OGs. And we can't forget about the OG Stretch, who has expressed a disliking for the whole of his own set after getting out of prison, and of course turning to the Ballas, in partial due to the OCB beef setup, but also due to his disdain for CGF after getting out. In the cases of Franklin and Stretch, we don't have too much of an idea on why their disdain against CGF specifically came up, but it's definitely worth mentioning. On the B side, however, we see different. Now, I want to talk about the values of one set in particular, OCB, Original Covenant Ballas, where they commonly speak about how you are not to break the rules, you're supposed to guide the young Ballas correctly, and of course making money.
Things ain't like they used to be. Yo, I hear you.
These young ballers got game. Just some of the rules is missing. Yeah.
Say, these young ballers was wilding out. They got the game, but they got the rules missing. That's why we gotta show them some leadership. They need leadership. Say, homie, I got a roll. But call a baller meet and I'll be there.
Look, I ain't trying to hear all that. Just have my money ready. A broke-ass baller is a slipping-ass baller.
Now, of course, making money isn't a baller-specific value. The line, a broke-ass baller is a slippin'-ass baller, was too hard to ignore, though. What is baller-specific is original Covenant ballers trying to keep a grasp on their gang and keep guiding their little homies in the correct direction. I mean, the families can't even keep their OGs in line, so fuck. We can see what little hope they got. And yeah, Grove Street families had their own values too, but the very fact that GSF isn't around states that either Sweets for the Hood mentality didn't last long and money and power got to him or whoever else was leader of GSF, or they just fell like bitches, giving the cul-de-sac to OCB. Either way, common families L. And one last thing, before we get off the topic of OCB, in the GTA Online nightlife leak for the contract DLC, we go to a penthouse party, and Rockstar specifically reskinned OCB to have designer clothes. I don't have a point to make about that. I'm just saying that if you can't see the beauty in Ballas with drip, then you're not living correctly. But yeah, I just felt like the values of OCB was very important to mention, considering they seem to be the biggest or main set. And the fact that the Ballas seem to stand for something when, if we look at the families, Lord knows what they stand for. So in conclusion, due to size, values, weaponry, and just about everything else at the Ballas show, I think the Ballas show themselves to be a better gang than the families at the end of the day. I mean, you can see it, right? The Ballas being more organized and the families being the families. And I know we didn't have too much on the families, but with what we do have and with all we have on the Ballas, the pieces are there and they fit. The families suck ass. One last thing, due to the fact that I could be corrected on a few things, although I am very confident that everything I said here is 100% false, I could be corrected on some things, and due to the fact that GTA Online continuously gets updates to this day, I will have a pinned comment down below for any corrections or updates. But congratulations, you spent however long this video is watching a random dude on the internet analyze a fictional gang for the GTA series. And I made it, so I don't know what that says about me. But my last video got more views than I expected it to, so I appreciate y'all, and also, as said before, if you were waiting for this, I'm sorry for the wait. This is like my 4th time, recording alone, so hopefully if you're listening to this, I actually got this bitch to upload. But thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed. Have a good one, and remember, FK all day, it's a purple world.